This is a short tutorial on how to sew the dart. You start by cutting out the pattern onto your fabric. Cut around the seam allowance, keeping the seam allowance there. And then what I do to transfer these lines onto the wrong side of the fabric is I trim this inside seam allowance away, and then I will trace right along the seam line. I went ahead and transferred my seam lines onto the wrong side of the fabric. I marked the alignment points, or the notches. I call them seam marks. So what we'll do now is we'll pin together this dart so that the seam lines lay on top of each other and the seam marks align to one another. Lined up the seam lines and the seam marks and pinned directly through the seam line on both sides. So I poke the pin through one side and verify on the other side that the pin comes out exactly in the same place on the mating seam line. You might see some puckering here. That's okay. As you sew it, you're actually sewing on the fabric's bias, so it'll stretch a little bit, and these puckers or these ripples, they'll smooth out. They won't be there in the end. Once you have this pinned and in place and you're happy with the accuracy of your pinning and your seam lines line up, we'll go ahead and go over to the machine and we'll sew it. Now when sewing it, you're going to start at the base and go towards the tip. Okay, this is important so that if you started at the tip and came this way, you're likely that these two, your seam allowances at the bottom won't line up very well. So if you start here and go up, then it works out a little easier. And the other thing is, you see I have tape here for my seam allowances. When I'm doing this dart, I'm actually keeping an eye on the needle going right on the seam line that we traced on there. I'm really not worried about the seam allowance at all. So I did pretty good. Bottom stitch is almost right on the line. Top stitch follows the line really well. If you can see that, that's good enough. That'll be good enough. Okay, so I pulled out the pins, and again, you notice that there's a little bit of rippling in the fabric along this edge, but you don't see any on the inside of the panel of the dart, right, on the side that matters. As I flip this right side out, it's formed a very nice curved dart. There's really no puckering going on here. So that worked really well. And then to finish this edge on the inside, the easiest thing to do, I find, is you just roll and hem this. The other thing you could do is you could put binding tape or bias tape on it. That's how you do the curved dart.